What's up, people? I'm Shaggy, the Opinionated Hippie, and this is part 5 of my reviewing and ranking David Bowie's albums. But I'm taking a detour and including in this ranking his two albums that he made, the two studio albums that he made with Tin Machine, a band that he started with Hunt Sales on drums and Tony Sales on bass, two people he had played with before. I believe they're brothers. He had played with them earlier, about a decade earlier. And guitar player Reeves Gabrels, who would sort of become David Bowie's guitar muse for a while after this and would pop up on many of his albums, the solo albums that would come after the dissolution of this band. I'm going to include these two albums in the overall Bowie rankings just because. It's been interesting, the sort of conventional wisdom on this band over the decades. Like when the albums first came out, they were sort of like a disappointment, just kind of David trying to lose himself, maybe bury himself in a band and just become like an anonymous rock and roller, right? But I don't think the music was I don't know, just it didn't get really good reviews when it came out. I remember it was kind of a disappointment, the sort of conventional wisdom vibe. And then over the years, that vibe started to change. Was like, no, maybe he was like a little ahead of his time and the world just wasn't ready for it, or it just had it been released later, it would have been a bigger hit. And then but in both those years, in both those spans, like the first album was generally regarded as the better of the two. And then time went on. And then whether or not it was ahead of its time or any good started to be up for debate again. And then it started to be like maybe the second album was actually better than the first. And that's the sleeper. That's the story here. So I don't know quite where it stands now. I think people generally regard it as an interesting part of David's ever challenging and interesting and exploring career. So anyways, I'm just going to rank these two, talk about them. And then eventually when I get to the end of the David Bowie studio albums, these will be integrated into the final ranking and final list. But here we go. Out of these two, which one do I think? The one that's conventionally been considered the best, or the sort of late dark horse that people are like, maybe this one is better. I don't know. Let's find out right now. Number two is Tin Machine 2. It is not better than the first. I think it sounds quite a bit more generic, I think, than the first album. And I think one of the problems on this album that would be sort of an issue, if maybe not ever a problem, but an issue on some of the solo albums that would follow, is David Bowie's use of Reeves Gabrels. I think it almost sounds like David writes these songs separately and doesn't really have space for Reeves other than like, hey, you got to play this chord or you got to play this progression to set it up or whatever. But he's like just writing these complete songs and then saying, okay, inject weird guitar playing here and here and here. And it doesn't seem xenocronized. Like, I mean, he's obviously listening to the song and he's a part of the song and responding to what's happening. But he also always doesn't seem like an absolute necessity to where a lot of these songs are going. It just seems like he's there to add like garnish. And the garnish is spectacular. He's a great guitar player. He's like Blue, who can shred. Like the very first song on the first album, like he just tears out this solo, right? It's an obvious like shredder type solo, and it quickly devolves into weird noises and like Morello meets Blue type stuff. And you're like, okay, this guy can do a lot of stuff. He's impressive. So like that's put to rest right away on the first album. And I think with a lot of these songs on here, you get some sort of standard type hard rock songs that maybe don't really have a defining riff or don't have a really strong melodic hook. But Reeves comes in at some point and like, you're like, okay, all right, this band can bring it. That's pretty good. But the songs themselves, I don't think are that fantastic. On this album, talking about this album specifically now, opens up with Baby Universal, which is trying to be a little bit weirder, you can tell, and a little more fun and loose. Maybe one of the highlights of the album. One Shot is sort of kind of some typical rock. You Belong in Rock and Roll has a more sort of a mid-tempo, maybe aiming for some like radio play type vibe. Not that commercial, but it's not as hard rocking. And I always think that he's starting to lean into like a Brian Ferry, early 80s sort of crooner Avalon type vibe, which is a good thing. He does that later in another song called Shopping for Girls, which also feels like maybe it's a little more like we can like chill out a little and kind of still be hard rock, but ride a groove. But after You Belong in Rock and Roll, he covers a Roxy Music song, If There Is Something, and just absolutely robs it of all of its quirky fun and joy. It's If There Is Something, it's like a third or fourth song on their first album, starts off with that awesome guitar thing and has this weird almost English country vibe and this cool ending, and all of that's just gone. It just becomes this almost generic rock piece, and yeah, kind of sad. We get a number of songs on the second half that almost feel like they're not fully cohesive. Like there's more to them, or they should have been developed more. Amlapura just kind of feels like there should have been more of a build. Something called Sorry, which has almost feels like a little mini epic vibe and should go somewhere but doesn't. Stateside is this kind of bluesy piece that's a little generic but utterly saved by some crazy guitar playing at the end. Yeah, and the rest of it's just kind of forgettable. I mean, what I'm listening to it, Reeves is always doing some good things. Bowie's voice is always nice to hear, but there's not much that really just sticks around. It's really, really memorable. There's no way I can say this is better than the first album. It's not. So, yeah. But if you think it is, convince me why in the comments, because my heart and ears are open. But anyways, on to number one. And number one is Tin Machine 1. Came out in 1989. And I would argue that this album is great. This is a great album. It's almost an hour long. It's like 57 minutes long. And I think there's probably a good 14 to 17 minutes you can maybe cut off the beginning or cut off the middle and get it down to a trim, lean 40 minutes. And it would be a much, much greater album. There is some sort of back half sort of filler or just stuff that I kind of don't remember after a couple days. I'm like, well, I don't remember listening to that song. But there are some really, really good things on here. It's just got a really good energy. The very first song out is probably one of the highlights, Heaven's in Here. We got this great opening riff that just feels rock and roll. And then when Reeves gets like a proper guitar solo in it, he like shreds and then goes weird and Bowie-esque. And just you're like, okay, this is a band that's going to rock hard, but it's going to have that Bowie weirdness, and it's going to have a little bit of Bowie sort of like pushing the envelope in some way. We don't have Fripp, but we got this Reeves Gabriel's guy who's definitely going to do weird things on the guitar. So it feels good. It feels right. The energy's good. The second song, Tin Machine, has a really good energy. There's a couple songs on here which have a really like Charlie Watts just dun 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 driving like drum beat that give it like this old like pure rock and roll vibe, but at the same time the energy is a lot more aggressive. The Tin Machine kind of sounds like a little like Johnny Cash meets like the Ramones type, just attack, but like storytelling, good vibe. Crack City is kind of fun. I Can't Read, one of the slower songs that develops really nicely. There's a cover of John Lennon's Working Class Hero, which just such not good choice in covers. It loses that sort of that powerful intimacy that the original version has, because it's just John has, is that right? John and his acoustic guitar, and it feels so like a man fighting the system. And because this is his bigger band, just doesn't feel like a true working class hero. The nature of the actual song itself and the way the sort of ending lyrics go give the end of it almost this Roger Waters, like, a certain like those anthems where Roger Waters just going against things at the end of it as the music just pounds away. Kind of feels like that towards the end of it. Almost saves the song, but I'd kind of rather do without it. Bus Stop is pretty fun little short number. Video Crime is kind of bad. It just feels like all the wrong things of 90s music. There's just a weird 90s vibe about it that doesn't work. Run, maybe it's the title, reminds me of like a Bryan Adams song, Run to You, which I then went back and listened to, and Run to You is not that bad of your song. But the closing Baby Can Dance is a great song. Has this awesome swag. It's like baby can do baby can dive, baby can swing, baby can dance. Like there's a list of things that baby can do. It's kind of a little bit of a attitude song. Fantastic, fantastic closer. The opener and the closer, I think, are probably the highlights on here, but there's a number of really good songs sprinkled throughout. Had it been shortened a little bit, yeah, I do think it could be even a better album. At least get off like the Video Crime and Run. I don't think those do anything for it. Drop the Working Class Hero. Right there, you drop like a good 12 minutes. You're down to like 45. That's a pretty good album. But yeah, I really enjoyed this album. This is a good album. Yeah, I don't think two is in any way better than it. I think this is solidly number one. Just the vibe from the very first notes of the very first song. This album just feels natural. Yeah, that's it. All right. That's my number one. Yeah, and that's it. I'm not going to put the list on the screen. It was number one was one, number two was two. It's easy to remember. I will eventually include these albums in the David Bowie overall list when that drops. Yeah, I will. That's going to happen. All right, but that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on these albums. I am interested if you think two is better than number one. I've come across articles recently online or just people's opinions where they're arguing that case, and I'm not there. I don't quite see it, but I have an open mind. But anyways, that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Peace. Enjoy your holidays, because that's when I'm filming this, during my and probably your holidays. Peace.